Good evening, everyone. My name is John Hughes. I'm honored to be the music director of the Chicago Master Singers, and welcome to another session of CMS University. I'm glad you're here. You know, it's during these very difficult times we're experiencing right now, it's really important to maintain our connection to each other and the communities that we feel so dear. And CMSU is one of those communities. Whether you've sung with us in the past or are just tuning in through YouTube, you are part of our community and we're glad that you're here. One of the ways that you can really be more interactive with this is by logging into YouTube and partaking in the chat, which is going in full force tonight on the right-hand side of your screen. You don't need to be a member of CMS or anything like that. Just log in and join in the conversation. You can also then ask me questions. I just ask that you start your questions that are intended for me with 4 question marks. That way, when I have the opportunity to glance over, I know that those ones are intended for me. I can put them up on the screen, and I'll try my best to answer them. All right, our topic for tonight is poetry in text setting. This is what makes choral and vocal music unique, right? We get to sing some of the world's greatest poems and texts, and that combination of music and poetry is really intoxicating, right? It grabs us at almost molecular level and really elevates our emotional connectivity to what we're doing. And so tonight I'm going to talk about how composers approach texts and help us maybe integrate some of these ideas into our own performances. So let's get into it. The first thing I want to just establish is that we're going to talk about 2 main ideas. The first being text stress, and the second being pictorial devices. So what do I mean by these terms? Text stress is basically in music that each word has an accented syllable and unaccented syllables. So if you think about the word certificate, the accented syllable is t, certificate, right? We don't say certificate, right, with the accent on the fi. We say certificate, right? So each word has this, and there's a term called prosody, which means the patterns of rhythm and sound used in poetry. And so that term kind of encompasses a lot of things, some of which we're not going to talk about. But for our purposes tonight, prosody is going to talk about this accented and unaccented syllables. Good composers align the musical stress with text stress. How do they do that? Well, I came up with 5 ways that composers add musical stress and hopefully align it with text stress so that the word comes out certificate when we sing it. So the first type of musical stress is metrical, right? So if we think of 3/4 time, the strong beat is the downbeat, 1. So it's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, etc. So a good composer will then, in order to capture the text stress correctly, we'll put that accented syllable on that strong beat. That's a metrical accent. Another type of accent would be agogic. This is when a stressed syllable receives a longer note value. Maybe it gets a dotted half note, and it's like that stressed syllable is actually elongated, right? That's called agogic. A tonic accent is when the accented syllable is placed either at the very top of a phrase, musically the highest note of that phrase, or the lowest note of that phrase. And that then kind of drives the energy toward the stressed syllable. A melismatic accent is similar to an agogic, where we're stretching that out, right? A melisma, multiple notes for a single syllable, right? So that melisma is stretching that accented syllable out. And then finally, another type would be cadential, right? Where we have a suspension and resolution. The suspension, the dissonant note, being on the accented syllable, and then the resolution being on the unaccented syllable. So an example of a cadential stress would be like that famous Amen, right? We have a suspension, dissonant note, and then we release on the resolution to the unaccented syllable. So some of these might feel kind of obvious, like, oh, well, that makes sense. But it's a lot more difficult than you might think, right? So we always have to assume throughout this evening that the composers intended to do these things, right? And it's not just that composers like how a melody goes and kind of fit the text to it. Rather, they start with the text and then kind of build the melody and everything else around it while paying attention to the word stress and obviously what the words mean. I want to just take a quick break here and look at an example here from a Christmas carol, The Holly and the Ivy. And I think this first phrase actually demonstrates some good text setting and some problematic text setting. So, the holly and the ivy, when they are both full grown, right? There's the two good things about this are the metrical accents, where the first syllable, holly, is on a downbeat, the holly and, right? So we get a strong musical accent, which aligns with the text accent. And the same thing happens here, the ivy, right? So we have this kind of strong syllable on a strong beat, one. So those are good things that happen. The problematic things here are these high E's, because they give a tonic accent to an unimportant word, the or full. The holly and the ivy, when they are both full grown, right? It all of a sudden, it kind of sounds like you have a wheelbarrow and one of the wheels is flat and it kind of jerks there instead of having a smooth ride in the wheelbarrow. It's the same concept here in this piece. I think it might make more sense if we replace these E's with B's. The holly and the ivy, the holly and the ivy, when they are both full grown. Right? It's not as maybe interesting of a melody, but it would make more sense from a text setting standpoint. I'm certainly not suggesting that we change the notes of this beloved Christmas carol. Rather, what I'm saying is we have to, as performers, realize that there's a problem here, and we have to make this as nuanced and subtle as possible on that top E in order to bring out the text stress correctly. So it's just, again, knowledge is power, and that's what good performers do, is use all this theoretical knowledge to their advantage when they're forming their interpretation of a piece. So that's a little bit about text stress. Let's go on to the other kind of big topic for tonight is pictorial devices. What does that mean? A pictorial device is when a composer musically depicts what's happening in the text, either literally or figuratively. So an example of that is from this Passion setting. This is a Passion of St. John from 1593 by the German composer Leonard Lechner. This is actually the piece I wrote my dissertation on. And this is from a scene in the first movement when Christ is being arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane. And he kind of reprimands the guards and his disciples, and everyone falls to the ground. That's what this text means. Und fielen zu Boden. And what do we see happening in the notes? They're all descending, right? It's kind of graphically depicting everyone falling down to the ground, right? So this is what I mean by a pictorial device. Okay, let's go on, and we're going to examine both the text stress and pictorial devices through the lens of a single piece, which is Frostiana. This is a piece that was written by Randall Thompson, the composer, and the text all comes from Robert Frost, hence the name Frostiana, right? Thompson and Frost were contemporaries. They knew each other. They actually were both present at the premiere of this piece. So we know that they worked closely together on it. And I think that Thompson's musical skills and Frost's skills as a poet really align in this piece, and that's why it's such a good microcosm of text setting and pictorial devices. So let's just start with a little overview of the piece. This piece was written in 1959 to commemorate the 200th anniversary of the incorporation of the town of Amherst, Massachusetts. It's for amateur choirs, from the local area, all got together. And so it wasn't written just for one group. It was kind of written for many groups to put together quickly in the weeks leading up to the performance. And it's 7 movements long for choir and piano. Again, all settings of Robert Frost's poetry. Now, one thing you have to understand about both Thompson and Frost in general, not just in Frostiana, is that they have a very accessible style that seems to really capture rural and kind of folk life. Someone compared Robert Frost's poetry to kind of like a Yankee wordsmith sitting by a potbelly stove talking about the changing leaves, right? And at times that borders on being dismissive. But what's really important to understand is even though they come off as so folksy and kind of quaint, you might say, their art, respectively either music for Thompson or poetry for Frost, has very, very deep roots. Both men were actually great admirers of people who came before them. Randall Thompson was a professor of counterpoint at Harvard for many years, knew the music of the Renaissance masters extremely well, and all of his music follows that strict counterpoint very closely, including Frostiana and things like Alleluia that we all know and love. Similarly, Frost very much follows poetic forms and meters that go back to Shakespeare and beyond. Both men actually shared a love of the Roman poet Horace. And so even though their music seems like it's very kind of accessible, it actually is really grounded and dictated by these very strict ancient forms. Sometimes people don't understand that, and Thompson and Frost are kind of, in my opinion, unfairly dismissed as being kind of traditional or simplistic or derivative. My blood boiled in 2015 when I read The New Yorker, and it described Randall Thompson's Alleluia, which is one of the best-selling pieces in the history of music publishing, as deathless in a pretty pejorative, dismissive way. That really, in my opinion, doesn't take into full account the mastery that these two men shared in their art forms. And there's this expression, which actually is attributed to the Roman poet Horace, that both men admired so much, that theirs is the art that hides art. Their skill and craft isn't overt and overly intellectual and impossible to understand. Their art is making these very complex things seem very simple and kind of colloquial. And to me, that is not worthy of dismissal, but rather it's worthy of praise. And I'm going to show you some examples of how I see that in this music tonight, and hopefully that'll help you understand what I mean by text stress and pictorial devices. So, one thing to realize about Robert Frost is that he wrote primarily in iambic meter. That is an alteration of weak and strong syllables in that order. And poets and people who study this use these scansion markings, a U being an unaccented syllable and a little accent meaning an accented syllable. So all of his poetry, just like Shakespeare's, has this alteration. When I see birches bend to left and right, right? So all of his poems follow that meter, which is really impressive. When you think about, when we speak, we don't think about where the accented and unaccented syllables are. But Frost did, and he was able to write these lines in this meter that sound very natural and speech-like. So Frost writes all these poems. Now Thompson has to set them to music. How does he capture this iambic meter well? Well, he does it in a number of ways, and I apologize if this is a little small, but thankfully you don't have to read all the individual notes. But one way that Thompson captures iambic meter is that he starts phrases on beat 4, so that he gets the metrical accent on beat 1. Remember, these lines start with a weak syllable, so he puts it on a weak beat. Then took the other as just as fair, right? So he's putting all the strong syllables on 1 and 3, and all the weak syllables on 2 and 4. Another way that he does this is in the telephone. He puts all the weak syllables on the offbeats, on the and the strong syllables on the beat. So every phrase kind of starts with this eighth rest. When I was just as far as I could walk from here today, there was an hour all still when leaning with, right? So all those, when I was just as far as I could walk from here today, fall right on the beat. Now, just as a quick aside, we have actually a very good example of a pictorial device on our all still, right? He's saying, I was out on a long walk, and then all of a sudden, I kind of looked around me, and everything was quiet and calm. And what happens? The notes get longer and steady, right? As opposed to all these rapid eighth notes. That's a pictorial device of showing the speaker kind of being calm. One final way that Thompson captures this text is to use 6/8. So this kind of, if you watch the musicianship session on rhythm, we know this is a compound meter, right? Where you kind of have 2 layers of rhythm, 1 6/8 notes, but kind of a macro level of 2 dotted quarter notes per bar. So then we get this, whose woods these are, I think I know, his house is in the village low. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. So he's, again, using all these different techniques to really capture this meter, which was so important to Frost. Let's talk a little bit about the pictorial devices in Frostiana, and I picked out some of my favorites, although there are many, many more. The first one I want to share with you is from a poem called Come In. And in this poem, the speaker goes out into the woods and kind of has this somewhat dark conversation with a thrush, a bird. And you'll notice this is the very beginning. There are no words yet, but this is just the piano introduction. And I shouldn't say just the piano introduction, right? This is actually really a meaningful moment because in this we have this imitation of the bird call. So he's kind of setting the stage through this pictorial device of a bird call. Another fairly obvious one in the piano part is the beginning of Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening. We all know and love that poem. In the right hand of the piano introduction, we have the falling snow. Right? So very gentle and staccato. And then it kind of builds when the left hand joins with the descending pattern, right? So it's almost like the snow is starting very gently, and then it's kind of the storm is gaining strength. A final example here would be on the word sigh in the tenor part here. This is from The road not taken, I shall be telling this with a sigh. The tenors have a moving note, kind of a suspension here. It is a suspension, a 4/3 suspension over the basses that sounds very much like a sigh. It goes like this. I shall be telling this with a sigh. Sigh. Right? So it's almost like onomatopoeia, right? Where we have the word sounds like its meaning. And that's what a really good composer does. Again, this isn't an accident that, Thompson wanted to write a C major chord and his finger slipped and he played an F and he's like, oh, that sounds pretty good. I'll move it down, call it a suspension, right? This is an intentional choice. And it's not notated in the music, right? Like, this is supposed to be a sigh gesture. It's our job as performers to recognize this and then add it into our interpretation. And I think when we start to really view music as having all these little Easter eggs in it, then we can really become even more powerful in our interpretations. I know you didn't sign up for a whole session on Frostiana, but as you can tell, it's a piece I really believe in, and there's so much more in this. Thompson was a great Renaissance music scholar and a great admirer of many Renaissance composers, in particular Monteverdi. And I don't want to get into all of it tonight because our topic is poetry and text setting. But I just want to let you know, in Frostiana, he directly quotes many of Monteverdi's most famous madrigals, including Sic io vorrei morire. So he has all these, he adds so much depth to this piece. And even though some people might say that it's kind of trite or just kind of a nice, simple piece, again, that's the art that hides art. It sounds that way, but there's so many layers of meaning. And I personally find a lot of joy in uncovering those in performances. So I encourage you, if you don't know this piece, or even if you do and maybe haven't sung it for a while, listen to it. There's many recordings of it on iTunes and Spotify and YouTube, and I find it really great. And of course, you can't beat Robert Frost's poetry either. Why don't we take a minute and look at the chat before we go on to a few other questions. Let me see. Here's one from Don. I love Randall Thompson too. Do you have something of his in mind for CMS to sing? Yes, I love Randall Thompson, and obviously we all love the Alleluia. I think that's a piece that should be done frequently. And I love Frostiana too, but there are a lot of other pieces by Randall Thompson that I think are worth considering. He, in fact, set a number of Horace's odes to music in Latin that are very interesting. They are very difficult, actually, and aren't performed often. I'd like to do those one day. I would also like to do his Requiem, which was lost for a long time, and I believe now is in print. It's for unaccompanied chorus and is quite moving. So that's something for sure on my bucket list. And as is the Testament of Freedom, which I know CMS has done before. Let's see if I have any other questions here. Let me go to the bottom. It looks like we're doing well. I'll check back on the chat in a little bit. I want to now share a couple other pictorial devices that I think are interesting. The first one is going to be from a piece called Till Mina in Memoriam. This is by a Swedish composer named Nils Lindberg, and it's a wordless lament. Let me get back to this. So it's just a short little piece by the Swedish composer, and it starts in unison, and it's wordless throughout. It's only about 4 minutes long here. But it starts, it's very kind of meditative. It's a lament for someone who's died. Thought it would be appropriate for All Souls Day. But it goes, So it's just this very haunting kind of ethereal melody, and then it kind of later on goes into parts. Now you might be wondering, why are you talking about a wordless piece in the session on text and poetry? Well, I wanted to look at the very end, and I think it'll make more sense. If you look with me at the last three measures, we get this. So it's just kind of this very open-ended piece. Now, a couple of things that kind of point to a deeper meaning are, first, this morendo, right? This means in music dying or fading away. So hold it as long as possible until there's nothing left. So that kind of is maybe a nod to this being a lament. But what really gave me goosebumps one day when I was preparing to conduct this is if you spell this last chord from the bottom up, we have D, E, A, and D. So it spells the word dead, D-E-A-D, from the bottom up. And again, you have to assume that composers are doing this on purpose, right? And I just remember kind of studying this piece back when we were in Iowa, and I kind of got the chills, like, oh, it's a little scary. But again, this is kind of one of those fun Easter egg moments. And any way that we as performers can find another kind of portal into a piece, whether it's through the text or some musical device that enlivens the text, I think that really enriches our interpretation. Maybe that knowing that final chord spells dead doesn't, substantially or quantitatively change how we sing the piece in a performance. But I think it does kind of, at a subconscious level, help us get into the piece in a different way. And I think it's one of those reasons that we love choral music and music in general, because we can access our soul in these ways. The other piece I wanted to talk about tonight is the famous O Magnum Mysterium by Lauridsen. We've talked about this piece a couple times in different ways this semester, but it just keeps coming up because it's such a fine piece. Just a little background on this. This piece is a setting of a Christmas text, O Great Mystery, right? And so the text is O great mystery and wondrous sacrament, that animals should see their newborn Lord lying in the manger. Blessed is the Virgin whose womb was worthy to bear the Lord Jesus Christ. Alleluia. Now, what we're going to focus on is this line about the Blessed Virgin Mary, right? The Immaculate Conception, right? And kind of the adoration of Mary, the Mother of God. So when Lauridsen gets to that text, which is at the top of page 6, he does something very interesting, and I'm going to play it for you first, and then we'll talk about it. So I'm going to play these first couple measures here, starting at Beata. We have Beata Virgo. Right? So we have this beautiful G-sharp dissonance. Right? This accented passing tone. Now, one thing that's important to realize is that G sharp is the only accidental in the entire piece. The piece is in D major, so it uses F sharp and C sharp, and he really sticks to that diatonic key. So he only uses keys or notes that are native to the key of D major, except here at the word Virgo or virgin. Now, why does Lauridsen do that? Well, I think, and Lauridsen has said this himself, that he puts that very sharp dissonance on the word Virgo to portray the pain that Mary would one day feel watching her son be crucified. And so he's choosing to, even though in this Christmas piece, he's choosing to kind of foreshadow the pain that Mary would experience. And I think that's just such a striking thing, and he does it so subtly, right? It's not overt or something. It's just it's a G sharp instead of G natural, but it has this tinge. I'll play it again for you in a minute. It has this beautiful tinge, and again, it isn't just about Lauridsen wanting to write these like kind of luxurious dissonances that we all love in these clusters. He's really doing it in service to the text. And I think, again, when we can find these layers of meaning, it elevates our performance. So I'll play it one more time just so you can hear it. And you'll notice that, again, the kind of resolution, moving from dissonance to consonance here, aligns with the text stress. The go is unaccented. So he does both a good job of kind of doing a little pictorial device here, as well as a good text setting. I want to take a minute here and look if there are any other questions here. It looks like we're doing pretty well. Yes. Here's a good observation. Didn't Bach do that with the B-A-C-H? Yes. So Bach would often write his name in music. So he played B, A, C, and H, which was the kind of the German way of saying B flat. So yeah, this is not unusual to Lindbergh to put little enigmas or riddles in his music. Good comparison. I wanted to share a couple resources for you here. There are a number of books in here. The first one is just this Archibald T. Davison book. This is a very, very old resource on the technique of choral composition, but it's a good one, and it has some discussion of how to set text. You can get this pretty easily online, so if you're interested, you can order that used, no problem. The rest of these are really trying to inspire more people to learn about Randall Thompson. I think he's kind of an underestimated composer these days. So a number of these here. I want to especially point out the one I wrote, not because I'm trying to promote myself, but it goes in this article, Art That Hides Art, goes into a lot greater depth about the things I talked about, as well as some other points about Frostiana and text setting that maybe weren't pertinent to our discussion tonight. This article is available for free online, and I put a link to it in the video description below. So if you're interested in learning more about Frostiana and Robert Frost in particular, please check it out. I'll stop and look at the chat one last time before we have our moments of Zen. We actually have 2 tonight. Okay. First of all, thank you for being here. I hope that this has been a nice respite at the end of a Monday here. I hope that you're all doing well during these difficult times and staying healthy and strong. I want to invite you to come back next week when I'll be talking all about the conductor's craft. What do we do as conductors? It's a lot more than just waving our arms at a concert. So I'll be talking about kind of what I'm calling the silent processes of conducting. What goes into getting ready to lead a concert? So come back for that next week. Please just register using the Eventbrite link in the video description below. I also want to ask you to like this video, press that little thumbs up button, and share it with family members, post it on Facebook, email it to a friend or choir director in your life. A lot of us are trying to keep choirs going during this COVID-19 pandemic, and so anything you can do to help share the service that we're offering is great. There's no limit on how many people can be part of CMSU, so the more the merrier. Also, I want to thank everyone who's sent in a donation for this. We are doing this free of charge, and we're happily doing that, but obviously we will always accept donations. The links to these opportunities to donate are in our video description below, so you can check those out, and thank you for the generosity you've shown during these difficult times. We appreciate it. Now, as I mentioned, we have 2 moments of Zen tonight. The first one is a beautiful piece called The Bluebird by Stanford. This is a great English part song from the 20th century, early 20th century. And I chose it tonight because it's a really great example of the music matching the text. This text is by Mary Coleridge, and it's talking about, a placid, just glass-like lake, and a single bluebird flying over it. And it's just a very serene piece and very delicate. And I think Stanford did an excellent job of kind of capturing that, just this little vignette, this moment of time. He captures it so well in his music. So I thought it would match beautifully with the text, or our topic for tonight. So we'll first listen to The Bluebird by Stanford, and again, the poem is here. Then, after that, we will go to CMS's very first virtual choir, which was a performance of Oh Love by Elaine Hagenberg, who we featured on CMSU a couple weeks ago. I especially want to say thank you to everyone who participated in this first virtual choir, as well as the CMS board for all the support they gave me along the way. This is the first one we've ever done, the first one I've ever done, and it was a learning curve for us all and took a lot of time and bravery to submit recordings, and I'm really pleased with the product and really proud of each and every person who participated. So I want to share that with you tonight as well. So we'll start with The Bluebird and then go to Oh Love, and then I'll be back to sign off after that. Okay, The Bluebird. I don't mean to cut off the credits, but we had so many people going that it takes a little bit of time. So I encourage you to watch our virtual choir and look for all the names in there and share it with everyone. I think it's a message of comfort and peace that we all need. And I know I've listened to that piece a lot of times over the past couple weeks in the editing process, and I still get chills every time. So again, thank you to everyone who participated and supported the virtual choir project. I'm looking forward to some coming up. And thank you for tuning in tonight to CMS University. I'm glad you're here. I hope it was helpful, and I'll look forward to seeing you next week. Until then, take care and have a good night.